Hey guys, tonight we begin with something soft and strange. A world of water that once fed an empire, where entire farms floated like lily pads, and the smell of lake mud was a sign that breakfast might be growing under your feet. You're not in Kansas, or Venice, or anywhere the air feels dry. You're on the wet, mist-wrapped shores of Lake Texcoco, sometime in the 1400s, long before concrete covered the ground and the city of Mexico swallowed the water. The air is cool and thick with fog. You breathe in, and it tastes like damp earth and crushed reeds. Somewhere nearby, a duck sneezes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun hasn't quite broken over the hills, and everything glows with that bluish pre-dawn hush. You're lying on the edge of the lake, a woven reed mat beneath you, the water licking gently at the toes of your sandals. You stretch, you blink, and in the stillness, you notice something impossible. There are farms in the lake, not beside it, in it. You sit up, blinking harder now. Thin green garden beds float just off the shoreline, long rectangular plots anchored with rows of willow trees, each one draped in morning mist like a sleeping scroll. You see a figure moving across one, back bent, arms in motion, planting, harvesting, or maybe just waving to a bird that won't shut up. You've entered the world of the chinampas, often called floating gardens, though that's a little generous. They don't float like boats. They're more like engineered rafts made of lakebed mud and ancient genius, held in place by water, roots, and sheer will. The Aztecs didn't invent them technically. Earlier peoples like the Xochimilca had been developing these swamp garden hybrids for generations. But the Aztecs? They turned chinampas into the superfood megafarms of their day, feeding an empire, outsmarting floods, and confusing the Spaniards a lot. You stand, knees creaking like damp wood, and step into a canoe tied nearby. It's carved from a single trunk and smells like wet bark. You paddle gently, your oar slicing through lily pads and water lettuce. The sound is almost meditative. Squish, glide, squish. The chinampas come into clearer view now. Each plot is about as wide as a subway car, and about twice as long. Some are planted thick with maize, their stalks already head-high and whispering. Others are bare, just mud, resting between crop cycles like contented cats. A few are half-harvested, with squash vines draped across them like abandoned scarves. And the smell, earthy, rich. You lean over the edge of the canoe and trail your fingers in the water. It's cool and alive with silt. Tiny fish scatter. Somewhere in the distance, a frog croaks something that sounds suspiciously judgmental. As you paddle between two gardens, a man calls out. He's kneeling in one of the plots, up to his elbows in mud, wearing a faded indigo tunic and a wide straw hat. He waves, then offers you a handful of amaranth leaves, dark green, gently spicy, prized by warriors and grannies alike. You thank him. He nods, already focused on pulling something stringy from the soil. His canoe is half loaded with produce, maize cobs, chili peppers, squash flowers, a few water snails in a woven net bag. You realize you're looking at the morning shift in a massive food web, centuries old and utterly quiet. The chinampas weren't just for growing food. They were pieces of social infrastructure. Families owned them, temples taxed them. Nobles surveyed them with squinty pride, and gardeners like this man, they ran the entire show. With nothing more than a paddle, a digging stick, and an alarming familiarity with duck nesting habits. You glide past. The mist is lifting now, and the sun's first golden spear stabs through the clouds. You hear distant laughter, the flap of heron wings, and the gentle floop of a basket dropped into a boat. Historians still argue whether the chinampa system was truly floating or more like a semi-permanent wetland buildup. Some believe the Aztecs inherited more than they invented. Others think this was one of the cleverest hydrological feats of the ancient world. Either way, you're here now, floating in the middle of it. And you haven't even gotten your feet muddy yet. You ease the canoe to the bank of a partially finished chinampa, where two men are waist-deep in muck, grunting as they haul something heavy from the shallows. One of them, dressed in a faded saffron tunic with mud climbing to his elbows, gestures for you to join. You do. Because why not ruin a perfectly clean outfit before breakfast? The mud sucks at your sandals as you slosh into the shallows. It's warm, rich, and surprisingly soft. More pudding than sludge. The men are building a new chinampa, and this is your introduction to the messiest genius in Mesoamerican agriculture. Step 1. They've driven long willow poles into the lake bed to form a rectangle. These stakes, or ahuejotes, will eventually take root and help anchor the structure, their branches forming a natural windbreak. At the moment, they're just hopeful sticks poking from the water like confused fence posts. Next, they've piled up lake-bottom muck, decaying vegetation, and reeds between the poles to form a raised bed. You help by hossing in soggy mats of tule, a fibrous water plant that squelches when you bend it. It's a little like weaving a waterbed with compost and optimism. The result? A long, narrow island that rises just above the water, spongy but sturdy. Over time, the layers will settle, firm up, and start to grow things. Not just plants, roots, connections, whole economies. One of the builders tells you, through a grin and a nose full of mud, that the chinampa system is sometimes called the field that walks, because with enough mud and effort, these islands can be moved, reshaped, rebuilt. Not easily, but enough to make the land itself seem alive. You pause to catch your breath and look around. To your left, a fully mature chinampa is bursting with squash vines, their bright orange blossoms yawning toward the sun. To your right, just reeds and water. In between, this mud-covered construction site, smelling like a wet sock filled with vitamins. A hawk circles overhead. A frog leaps from your arm. A duck watches judgmentally from a patch of lilies. You wonder how long it takes to build one of these from scratch. The answer? Not long, if you've got enough people and a good source of lake gunk. It's the maintenance that takes time. Balancing water levels, keeping roots in check, making sure your carefully composted soil doesn't wash away every time it rains. You lift a basket of wet muck and dump it between the poles. The splash hits your tunic. The man beside you nods approvingly. You're officially part of the crew. Nearby, two boys are planting water lilies in the shallow margins of a new chinampa. They do it with the same focus some people reserve for surgery. Mud to elbow, tongue between teeth, gently patting each lily bulb into place. It's part beautification, part erosion control, and it looks really cute on a sunny morning. Over the next hour, you watch the garden bed grow, an act that feels more conjured than constructed, from wet nothing to a tidy grid of soil, reeds, and effort. Historians still argue whether this system counts as hydroponic. It doesn't fit modern definitions, but it definitely plays with the boundaries of land and water. Some even compare chinampas to proto-aquaculture, like giant planters with roots in both worlds. You think about that as you scoop another basket of mud, your arms sore but oddly proud. This is engineering, yes, but it's also art. Soil art. Water art. Repetition and ritual built into geometry. By the time the sun climbs high and begins to burn away the last scraps of mist, your arms are covered in dirt and your heart is strangely full. You've built a piece of floating land, from scratch, in your bare feet. You squint down the canal where other chinampas stretch in neat rows, green corridors with glinting water in between. It looks like a quilt stitched across the lake, and somehow you helped tie in one more square. The sun creeps higher over Lake Texcoco, brushing the water with gold, and you're already sweating. Not the gross kind, just a light, steady dampness that feels like you've been hugged by a very polite cloud. You wipe your brow with your sleeve and continue following a man named Toshli, whose name, he tells you, means rabbit. Toshli is your host this morning, an Aztec gardener with the easy confidence of someone who knows the land better than he knows his own reflection. His tunic is faded indigo, patched at the elbows, and his hair is pulled back with a strip of woven fiber. He doesn't say much, just gestures when he wants you to follow, and grunts approvingly when you manage not to fall into the canal. You're spending a full sunrise in his world, a 1371 edition of A Day in the Life, chinampa style. First stop, his tool rack, which is basically a cluster of sticks leaning against a willow tree. It includes a koa, a digging stick with a flared obsidian tip, and a few baskets woven from lake reeds. That's it. No plows, no bronze, no fancy attachments, just sharpened wood and muscle memory, passed down for generations. You grab a basket and follow him down the narrow strip of garden. The mud is firm today, packed from weeks of layering and root weaving. You spot prints from ducks, dogs, and very small feet. Toshli's children, maybe, or a neighbor's toddler playing harvest. He stoops to inspect a patch of young maize, rubbing the leaves gently between his fingers. Then he moves on to amaranth, already thigh-high, with red-tinged stalks and blossoms that smell faintly nutty. You kneel and try to mimic him, pinching a leaf just so, checking the stem for signs of rot or pest. He nods once, which, coming from Toshli, is basically a standing ovation. Next comes watering. You expect some kind of ladle or scoop, but Toshli simply pulls a clay jar from beneath a willow and dips it into the canal. He walks in a slow, practiced rhythm, pouring small arcs of water between rows of beans and chilies. The canal water isn't crystal clear. It's silty and rich, tinged with algae and who knows what else. But that's the point. This water is food. It's compost in motion, a literal nutrient stream feeding the chinampa like veins through a living body. A duck quacks nearby. Toshli sighs. Apparently it's that duck, the one that eats the seedlings. He throws a walnut shell in its general direction, not hard enough to hit, just hard enough to make a point. Mid-morning now, and you're both seated beneath a willow's dappled shade. Breakfast arrives in the form of flat maize cakes wrapped in squash leaves, with a paste of ground beans and wild herbs. There's also something crunchy that Toshli insists is harmless lake protein. You decide not to ask. As you eat, he tells you how long he's worked these gardens. Since my feet reached the dirt. Which sounds poetic, until you realize he means it literally. His father gardened here, so did his grandfather. The chinampa you're sitting on was rebuilt 4 times before Toshli was born. His name may be Rabbit, but his roots go deep. You chew in silence for a while. The breeze carries the sound of flutes from a distant temple platform. Probably a festival day in the city center. Toshli doesn't care. The corn needs tending regardless of festivities. You walk the rows again. He shows you how to clip basil without damaging the stem, how to brace tomatoes with split cane. Every gesture feels ritualistic, calm, careful, quiet. No one yells here. There's no hurry, just a rhythm. Historians still debate whether chinampa laborers were landowners, tenant farmers, or something more communal. Toshli doesn't seem to care about titles. He cares about soil texture and what the ducks are plotting. By midday, the garden buzzes with life. Dragonflies skim the canals. Lizards dart across the beds. A child arrives with a small bundle of new seedlings wrapped in palm fronds. Toxtli nods to her, and she begins planting without a word. This is not just agriculture, it's choreography. And you? You're a slightly clumsy extra in a very old dance. But you're learning. As the sun reaches its peak, Toxtli shows you one final task: the canal walk. You both hop into the canoe and glide between rows, checking water levels and clearing debris. He flicks aside floating moss with his paddle, adjusts a water gate, and mutters something about too many turtles this week. You glance at the surface of the water, green-tinted, glittering with sunlight, and realize that below you lies centuries of history. Not just mud and roots, but memory, ritual, routine. This is a life built on repetition. Not glamorous, not grand, but essential and strangely beautiful. The sun shifts from white to gold, casting long shadows across the chinampas as you settle in beside Toxtli for the next chore, harvesting. Not in the frantic wheat field, sickle-swinging way you might imagine, but with a quiet, deliberate rhythm that matches the pace of the lake. You begin with maize. The stalks are as tall as your shoulders now, their tassels whispering in the breeze. Toxtli hands you a short wooden blade, more of a scraper than a knife, and nods toward the base of a stalk. You grasp it firmly, twist, and hear the low, satisfying crack as the cob comes free. The kernels are plump, tight in rows like tiny yellow soldiers waiting for orders. Toxtli doesn't rush. He inspects each cob, tugs the husk back, and occasionally tosses one into a basket with a small grunt of disapproval. Mold, insect damage, it happens. He shrugs like the lake will understand. You copy his movements, clumsily but sincerely. Next up is squash, the chinampa favorite. You kneel at the edge of a patch where thick vines curl and twist like green dragons napping in the sun. Their broad leaves form a canopy, and underneath, the yellow-orange squash blooms open like sleepy mouths. Some fruits are ready, round, firm, the color of sunset. Others still need time. Toxtli taps one with his knuckles, listens for the right hollow note, and snips it free. You place it gently in the canoe. It thunks against the maize, the sound of abundance. Then there's amaranth. This one surprises you. It's not a grain in the way you thought. It grows like a rebellious flower, with bright magenta plumes and leafy greens that shimmer when the wind hits them just right. Toxtli plucks both the seeds and the tender leaves, dropping them into separate sacks. The seeds will be roasted, popped like mini popcorn. The leaves, steamed or eaten raw. You taste one, earthy, peppery, full of something ancient and slightly smug. As you harvest, he tells you that these three crops, maize, squash, and amaranth, form the backbone of every good table. Each serves a role. Maize gives strength. Squash brings softness. Amaranth? Amaranth makes your thoughts clearer, he says. You don't know if it's true, but your mind does feel a little less muddy today. The canoe is filling now. You pause to drink from a gourd and wipe your brow with your sleeve. Ducks paddle nearby, gossiping with frogs. Somewhere, a woman sings a slow, lulling tune about rain. It weaves through the reeds like a lazy serpent. You take a moment to appreciate the quiet complexity of this place. The interplanting, maize growing tall while squash sprawls low. Historians still argue whether chinampa yields were truly superior to old-world farms. but records show they fed an enormous population. Some estimates suggest a single hectare could yield 7 crops per year, with proper rotation and canal maintenance. Others think that's optimistic. Either way, these gardens didn't just sustain cities, they grew them. You reach for another cob. This one's unusually colorful, purple kernels glinting like amethyst. Tochtli grins. That one's for the priests, he says, or the dancers. Depends who asks first. Even crops have personalities here. You continue harvesting, the afternoon passing like a whispered story. You learn to tie bundles of herbs with reed fiber. You learn the gentle art of digging root vegetables without splitting them. You accidentally squash 3 squash blossoms and get scolded by a passing goose. Tochtli says nothing, just hums. Eventually, the canoe can hold no more. You pause to admire the bounty. Maize in yellows, reds, and blues. Squash striped and round. Amaranth feathers piled like exotic birds. And beneath it all, the smell of clean mud and leafy sweat. The sun has begun its descent, turning the lake silver. You and Tochtli push the canoe off, guiding it slowly down the narrow canal. You pass other gardeners, all returning from their own plots, each canoe different, each harvest unique. Some carry chilies, bright red and stinging. Others are piled high with flowers, destined for markets or temples. A few have bundles of herbs, their scents mixing into something sharp and sweet. And all of them glide through this floating maze, like bees returning to a hive. You realize then, this is more than farming. This is orchestration. Each chinampa plays its part. Each gardener knows their role. And the produce? It's not just food. It's culture, economy, ceremony. You sit back, tired, but full of quiet joy, your legs sore, and your hands stained green. You've worked a chinampa, and in the process, you've been folded into its rhythm. The canoe drifts gently through the narrow water channels, and you're not paddling anymore. You're just watching. Because now it's time to see the miracle beneath the mud. The structure that holds this floating world together and keeps it from drifting off like a lily pad on vacation. You pass by a chinampa under repair, and 2 gardeners wave you over. You nod and hop out, sandals squelching as you step onto a soft patch of recently restored soil. One of the men is driving a stake deep into the earth, no ordinary stake, but a young willow sapling, green and flexible. This is where the magic starts. The ahuejotes, these willows, are more than decoration. They're the anchors, the skeleton, the living fence posts of the chinampa system. Planted at the corners and along the edges, their roots grow downward into the lake bed, weaving through layers of reeds, silt, and decaying vegetation like fingers holding everything in place. You kneel and touch the soil. It's springy, moist, and surprisingly warm. A nearby gardener explains that over time, the willow roots knit together the walls of the garden like threads through cloth. The more they grow, the stronger the island becomes. It's like rebar, but leafy. You follow the edge of the chinampa, where the willow roots trail into the canal like tendrils. Tiny water insects skim across the surface. You spot a turtle sunbathing on a knot of reeds, unbothered by your presence. At one corner, a gardener pulls up a clump of decayed vegetation to reveal the layered structure beneath. You see how the garden was made, layer upon layer of lake muck, aquatic weeds, and composted debris, all stacked like the most nutritious lasagna you've never wanted to eat. The canals are just as important as the beds themselves. They aren't random. They're engineered to direct water flow, keep soil moist but not flooded, and provide a steady supply of nutrients. It's not quite irrigation, not quite aquaculture, somewhere in between. An elegant balance of mud and movement, You hop into a shallower section where a boy is clearing a blockage. A fallen branch has clogged one end of the channel, causing the water to back up. He uses a curved stick to dislodge it, and immediately the water rushes through, swirling with bits of moss and fish scales. The current is deliberate, not strong, but just enough to circulate nutrients, oxygen, and even the occasional wandering frog. Historians still debate the full extent of Aztec hydrological knowledge. Some argue the canal systems were part of a much larger urban design, linked directly to the needs of Tenochtitlan, their capital. Others think the chinampas developed more organically, each plot managed by local families with minimal central oversight. Either way, the result was the same: a floating infrastructure that not only produced food, but managed water, cleansed waste, and even served as defense. Try marching an army through a maze of narrow canals and ankle-deep mud. You'll be shin-deep in regret before lunch. You lean over the side of the canal and watch tiny roots dangle into the water like threads from a forgotten loom. A fish flicks past. A dragonfly hovers. Even here, in what looks like a half-built garden plot, life buzzes. Further along the canal, two older women are reinforcing one of the banks with bundles of reeds, lashed together and stuffed against the edge like a pillow fort for vegetables. One of them hands you a bundle and shows you how to press it into the gaps. It's warm, slightly squishy, and smells like fermented watercress. You work quietly, feeling the reed wall firm under your hands. "Good for another season," the woman says, nodding. Then she offers you a bite of sweet potato, roasted in a clay dish balanced on a flat stone. You take it. It's soft, smoky, and slightly caramelized. It might be the best thing you've tasted all day. As you chew, you glance across the water at another chinampa under construction. A long rectangle of lake muck, ringed by willow posts, partially built up, like a sentence still missing its last word. Two boys are dragging bundles of aquatic plants to layer onto the frame. One of them slips, lands in the mud, and howls with laughter. It occurs to you, the chinampas aren't just agricultural plots. They're living systems, constantly built, rebuilt, repaired. Not one of them is finished. They shift, grow, erode, and renew like the lake itself. Back in the canoe, you glide slowly along the canal, looking down through the murky water at the submerged edges of older chinampas, ones no longer used, their borders faded but still visible. Ghost gardens. The sun dips lower now, casting the canals in bronze. Shadows of willows stretch long across the water, and the wind moves through the reeds like whispered stories. And as you drift between these floating farms, you realize you're not just in a garden. You're inside a machine made of roots, mud, and human memory. A system that floats, but never drifts. Your paddle dips lazily into the canal, the water parting like warm silk as you glide between rows of chinampas. The sun is in its lazy descent now, soft gold against the ripples, and you've officially entered the calmest commute on the planet. Canoe delivery hour. Tochtli is in the back of the canoe, steering expertly with a single oar. You sit cross-legged up front, wedged between baskets of produce. Maize still in husk, bundles of chilies wrapped in banana leaves, bright orange squash blossoms, and two grumpy frogs hitching an unsolicited ride in a basket of amaranth. You reach down to nudge them out. They refuse. You get the sense they think they're supervising. The canal curves like a lazy snake, and other boats pass you in slow procession. Floating merchants, gossiping farmers, and temple runners on official flower delivery missions. Everyone paddles at the same unhurried pace. It's like a lake-based version of rush hour, if rush hour smelled like sweet basil and moved at the speed of a thoughtful poem. To your left, a girl in a teal tunic steers a canoe loaded with live ducks, their necks tied loosely to the rim with woven reed cords. The ducks are quacking loudly and pointedly. One is clearly the ringleader. The others follow his grumbling with the weary nod of birds who know they're being overbooked for market. Toxtli grins and calls something to the girl. She laughs and retorts with a phrase that includes the word pompous. Apparently, even ducks have reputations. You round a bend and find yourself in a busier channel. The banks narrow here. More chinampas, closer together, their roots and walkways brushing the edge of the water. It's a little trickier to navigate. You duck under a low willow branch and barely avoid a sleeping heron who gives you the side-eye without waking. At one junction, a man in a wide-brimmed straw hat signals with a carved wooden flute. One trill, two short bursts. Toxtli echoes the sound with his own little ocarina. This is how canal etiquette works. Flutes, paddles, and exaggerated eyebrow communication. A boy on the shore tosses a length of cord into your boat. It's tied to a bundle of small jars filled with honey and something that smells strongly of fermented guava. "Trade for chilies?" he asks. Toxtli inspects the jars, shrugs, and agrees. No words needed, just glances and canoe commerce. You reach a wide pool where several boats have converged for what can only be described as an aquatic gossip break. One woman, waist deep in water and up to her elbows in squash blossoms, is telling a story with wild hand gestures. The others laugh, their boats bobbing like lazy turtles. You pause here, because everyone does. The sun hangs low behind a ring of hills. You learn, via overlapping whispers and shout laughs, that someone's son tried to impress a girl by juggling avocados and dropped one into a priest's canoe. That a goose stole a small clay idol from a shrine and won't give it back. That Toxtli's cousin might be marrying a chili vendor, but no one's sure because neither of them has actually spoken about it yet. They've just exchanged very intense squash. This floating marketplace of murmurs feels like the nervous system of the city. Not official, not mapped, but very much alive. Historians still wonder just how structured these exchanges were. Some claim there were official canal lanes and regulated traffic. Others believe it was all instinct and rhythm, shaped by generations of local knowledge and a shared agreement not to tip anyone over. As dusk approaches, Toxtli guides the canoe into one final channel, narrower and quieter. The frogs in your basket croak a low, approving harmony. You pass under a wooden footbridge where vines hang like curtains. A carved face peers down from a beam, half swallowed by moss. An old lake deity, forgotten by most, still watching over floating harvests. You arrive at a dock, more of a tide raft than anything formal. Toxtli begins unloading baskets while you stretch your legs and brush willow fluff off your tunic. A girl from a nearby houseboat helps, expertly lifting one of the heavier baskets of maize without spilling a kernel. She asks you if the ducks behaved. You shake your head. She nods. They never do. As the last basket is handed off, you sit at the edge of the dock, feet dangling in the warm canal. Fireflies begin to blink in the reeds, and the water is quiet again, save for the occasional splash of something large that refuses to show itself. And as the night settles softly over the chinampas, you feel like you floated not just through a commute, but through a conversation, with plants, with people, with ducks, with place. A commute, where the road is water, the talk is barter, and even frogs ride free. The next morning, you find yourself elbow-deep in muck again. Not glamorous muck, not even useful composty muck. No, this is aromatic, aggressive, frog-adjacent muck that squelches like it knows you're new here. You're helping Toxtli with a critical if unglamorous task, fertilizing the chinampa beds. He hands you a woven reed shovel, the kind that seems too flimsy to do anything until you realize it's been doing this job for centuries. Together, you wade into the shallow edge of the canal where the water is thick with lake gunk, a nutrient-rich blend of decaying plants, fish droppings, algae, and whatever else has recently dissolved in the soup. You scoop it into a clay bucket, trying not to breathe too deeply. Best food for plants, Toctli mutters. Worse smell for everything else. You believe him. Each bucket gets carried carefully onto the chinampa and dumped in long, snaking rows between the crops. You try to imitate Toctli's smooth pour, but your first attempt creates a splash zone that offends a frog, 2 corn stalks, and your dignity. The frog croaks disapproval from the ridge. You sincerely apologize. It does not accept. Toctli's method is quiet but masterful. He balances each pour so the liquid soaks the base of the plant without touching the leaves. Too much on the top, he says, and it burns. You're learning that even fertilizer is a delicate art here. The soil drinks the muck with alarming speed. You watch it seep downward, darkening the ground like coffee on parchment, and the smell, while initially awful, slowly becomes earthy. Not pleasant, but tolerable, like the price of abundance. After several rounds, Toctli switches to the next ingredient in his fertility cocktail. Dead fish. Yes, fish. He pulls a string of them from a basket, already starting to go soft. Left too long in the sun, he explains, shrugging. Now the tomatoes get them. 1 fish per hole. Not a glamorous end for the fish, but an excellent meal for the roots. You bury them with a flat stick, pressing the soil back gently over their silver scales. It feels a bit like a funeral, but a strangely hopeful one. Death nourishing life, decay recycled into flavor. As you work, the frogs return, and not just the judgmental one from earlier. There's now a whole committee of frogs perched along the canal's edge, watching you like a panel of disgruntled judges. One lets out a long, theatrical ribbit. You get the distinct feeling they've seen your work and found it serviceable. You take a break on a low reed bench and reach for a water gourd. The air is thick and warm, filled with the scent of moist soil, crushed basil, and lightly fermenting fish. Toctli sits beside you, chewing on a dried chili and staring out at his chinampas like a man checking on sleeping children. You can't. Historians still puzzle over the specifics of Aztec fertilizer use. Some argue it was mostly algae and plant debris. Others swear by records that mention human waste collection and composting systems so advanced they put some modern municipalities to shame. But nearly all agree on one point. The system worked. Chinampas didn't just grow food. They regenerated it. Every cycle reinforced the next. The lake fed the plants fed the people, the waste fed the lake. A nearly closed-loop system with ducks and frogs occasionally chiming in for comic relief. You wander over to a newer section of the garden where bean vines are being trained along interlaced reeds. The soil here is darker, softer, freshly enriched from the morning's efforts. Toctli joins you, kneeling to pat a lump of mud with surprising tenderness. Now we wait, he says. You ask how long. He shrugs. Depends on the rain, the sun, the frogs. You glance at the frog panel. They seem unconvinced. The afternoon passes in the kind of slow, sun-drenched haze that makes you lose track of time. You spread compost, adjust plant ties, and even help redirect a bit of canal flow using a reed mat and a flat stone. The water trickles obediently, and the soil hums its approval in the language of steam and squish. By sunset, the chinampa glows with that strange golden shimmer, half wet, half fertile fire. The fish are buried, the muck is spread, and the plants, well, they look pleased. You're tired, dirty, and definitely in need of a rinse. but your garden rows are rich, warm, and alive with promise. You've helped feed the soil, and the soil, in return, is already beginning to feed everything else. You rise the next day to the soft glow of pre-dawn light, the kind that turns lake mist into silver ribbons. Everything is hushed except for the occasional flap of heron wings or a distant splash you hope was a fish. You step into the garden with Tochtli, who greets you with a yawn and a nod, the Aztec version of a motivational speech. Today isn't about planting or harvesting. It's about reading time in dirt and stars. Tochtli begins by showing you a smooth circular stone set upright at the corner of his chinampa. At first, it looks decorative. Then he points to the long shadow it casts across a carved line in the soil. "Sun says it's planting day," he mutters. You blink. He's using a solar marker, a kind of chinampa sundial, to track seasonal transitions. Aztec farmers, it turns out, didn't just dig and hope. They watched the skies, carefully. The sun's path, moon phases, and even star risings were all part of the agricultural calendar. And chinampas? They were the perfect stage for such celestial choreography. Tochtli squats in the mud and draws a spiral with his finger. Around it, he adds symbols you vaguely recognize from temple murals. Maize, rain, wind, the jaguar. It's a visual calendar, an agricultural wheel that turns with the stars. Rain month comes soon, he says. Time to plant squash closer to the willows. They like wet feet. You look up. The sky is blushing orange now, and thin clouds move like smoke over the horizon. Somewhere, a priest is probably offering flowers to Tlaloc, the rain god, just in case the clouds need motivation. Next, Tochtli shows you a patch of garden that's been left fallow. Not empty, but full of low-growing nitrogen fixers, plants chosen to renew the soil between cycles. He explains that this plot will be turned under at the next full moon. The moon helps the roots let go, he says. Whether this is science, myth, or both, you don't ask. You're too charmed by the idea that lunar gravity might also influence kale. A group of women arrives shortly after sunrise, carrying seed baskets woven from palm fronds. Each one contains a different kind of maize, white, blue, red, even speckled. They kneel with slow grace and begin pressing seeds into the mud using pointed sticks worn smooth by hundreds of hands. You join them. The planting is done in silence, each seed tucked into its own little cradle, spaced with uncanny precision. It's like watching monks arrange calligraphy. The pattern isn't just for yield, it's ceremonial. Maize likes rhythm, one woman says softly. If you plant offbeat, it grows confused. Historians still argue whether planting ceremonies were primarily religious or practical, likely both. The Aztec calendar was a fusion of sky and soil, where Tochtli hands you a small obsidian mirror, a smooth black disc about the size of your palm. He tilts it toward the sky. The reflection is warped, eerie, showing a tiny sun hanging above your own tiny chinampa. Use it to find the fire days, he says. Days the gods pay more attention. You have no idea what he means, but it feels important. Later, you help him tie colored cords to a post at the edge of the plot. Green for maize, orange for squash, purple for beans. It's both a planting marker and a prayer. When the wind moves through them, the cords whisper like little streamers of intention. The rest of the morning is spent checking the other plots. Some are due for harvest, others just sprouting. A few have offerings nestled into corners, flowers, bits of fruit, tiny carved animals. From the kids, Tochtli says, or from someone asking for better tomatoes. You pass a floating shrine, half submerged in reeds, its platform covered in marigolds and obsidian flakes. Someone's been praying hard. Probably about chili peppers. Chili harvests inspire particularly passionate devotional energy. You pause at the end of the row and look back. The chinampa is a patchwork quilt, some plots fresh and green, others dark with fresh mud, a few blooming wildflowers where crops once grew. It breathes, not metaphorically. You can feel it beneath your feet, the exhale of moist soil warming under the sun. And the sky above? It's no longer just decoration. It's a guidebook. The sun, your clock. The moon, your calendar. The stars, your mysterious consultants who drop by only when the night is clear and you've done your chores. You rest beneath a willow as the day begins to heat up. The breeze warm now, lifting the smell of damp reeds and fresh soil. There's no dramatic harvest today, no loud marketplace or urgent tasks. Just a moment of standing still on a floating island built by hands and held together by time, waiting for the next whisper from the sun to tell you what comes next.
By mid-afternoon, you and Tockley drift toward a quieter corner of the lake, away from the hum of trade boats and the gentle splashes of ducks reenacting their latest disputes. The water narrows here into a soft maze of canals, framed by flowering trees and thick tufts of tall grass. The air smells like warm clay, lilies, and something faintly sweet, like citrus and earth dreaming together. This is Xochimilco, the Chinampa district sacred to both plants and gods. You glide past a series of floating flower beds, chinampas not used for food, but for color. Rows of marigolds, snapdragons, and xochitl sway in the breeze, their reflections flickering in the water like a painting trying to remember itself. Some flowers are tied into bundles, ready for temple offerings. Others are simply left to bloom, filling the air with perfume so thick it feels drinkable. Tockley doesn't speak here. He paddles slower, eyes lowered. It's not just farming anymore. It's ritual space. At the far end of one chinampa sits a small altar, barely a table, covered in flower petals and carved wooden tokens. Tiny clay faces stare up at you, miniature deities of maize, rain, and fertility. One wears a painted smile. The other looks perpetually offended. Balance, you suppose. Children run along the narrow edge of the plot, giggling, scattering petals, and stopping to rearrange the idols when they think no one's watching. Tockley doesn't scold them. This is a place of play and prayer, and apparently the gods don't mind either. You kneel near the water's edge and watch as a woman dips a clay bowl into the lake and whispers a prayer before sprinkling water over her flower beds. Her tunic is deep saffron, embroidered with vines, and she moves with a kind of grace that makes you straighten your spine without thinking. She turns, smiles faintly, and gestures for you to join her. Together you help her pluck marigold blossoms, setting them into a shallow basket lined with reeds. Each bloom is turned gently, as if checking for secrets. She explains that these flowers guide the dead, their scent a path back to memory during the Festival of Souls. You nod, suddenly very aware that these flowers may outlive you in meaning. Tockley joins you and produces a bundle of feathers tied with colored thread. He places it at the base of a young willow and steps back. For Tlaloc, he murmurs, for rain and good squash. Historians still argue whether Chinampa floriculture was driven more by ritual or commerce. Some say the flowers were temple tributes and funeral rites. Others insist they were a cash crop for the elite. The truth, as always, floats between. A boy near the canal blows bubbles through a hollow reed, and they rise over the marigolds like transparent moons. His sister chases them, shrieking with delight as one lands softly on the nose of a duck, who blinks once and swims away with tremendous dignity. You walk further into the flower plots, guided by Pokshli. The rows here are narrower, tighter. Every inch packed with color. Indigo blooms rising beside pale yellow buds. Crimson petals brushing lavender vines. Even the shadows seem painted. You pass a woman grinding something with a stone pestle. Flower paste, she explains, used for both pigment and perfume. She dabs a bit on your wrist. It smells like sun-heated jasmine with a hint of fresh soil. You swear you'll remember it for the rest of your life. As the sun dips lower, a bell rings somewhere upriver. Not a harsh bell, but a hollow, gentle clang, like a gourd echo. People begin gathering near the altar. Dokshli hands you a small garland of woven reeds and blooms. You follow. They light tiny floating candles, placing them in the canal, each flame cradled in a folded leaf boat. The petals on the altar catch the wind, swirling in golden spirals, and the floating flames drift slowly toward the open lake, leaving ripples and blessings behind them. You sit beside Dokshli, garland in hand, surrounded by warmth, scent, and hush. No one speaks. They don't have to. The flowers speak. The water replies. And for a moment, you understand something ancient. That gardens can be prayers. That petals can be stories. And that even in a world built on mud, beauty floats. The next morning, long before the lake heats up, you find yourself once again in the canoe. But this time, you're not just meandering through canals. You're on a mission. It's market day. Tochtli piles the boat high with bundles wrapped in palm fronds, produce baskets balanced like puzzle pieces between your knees and the gunnels. The water's still quiet, save for the rhythmic slap of paddles and the distant rattle of wooden chimes from a garden altar seeing you off. As you round the first bend, more boats appear, emerging from side canals like ducks from reeds. Each is loaded with something different: flowers, maize, live poultry, baskets, herbs, pottery, songs. Yes, one canoe has a boy practicing flute scales to impress a girl 2 boats behind him. She's pretending not to notice. The sun climbs as you near the floating marketplace. Tlatelolco's watery cousin, a hub of chinampa trade. There are no roads here. The stalls are moored rafts, floating docks, and even long canoes tethered side by side, forming rows of vendors on water. Tochtli steers into a space between 2 other canoes. One is selling fried insects. The other has what looks like a dozen different chilies, ranging from emerald green to volcanic red. You tie off and begin unloading. As you do, the market comes alive around you. Hawkers chanting offers, children splashing between canoes, someone loudly arguing over the price of tamales. A duck waddles across a plank and steals a gourd before anyone can stop it. Laughter follows, and no one seems particularly mad. Ducks, it appears, are accepted losses in trade. You help Tochtli arrange his goods. Maize cobs stacked like a golden pyramid. Amaranth tied with dyed string. Squash blossoms fanned out like an edible bouquet. He adds bundles of epazote, a fragrant herb, and 3 small clay pots of honey sealed with cactus wax. Shoppers float past in boats or wander narrow walkways that connect chinampa to chinampa. One man paddles up, examines the squash, and offers a hand-carved spoon as partial trade. Tochtli squints at the spoon, tests its edge, and nods. The deal is done. Another woman swaps 2 ropes of dried peppers for a basket of amaranth. Her child tugs at your sleeve and whispers, "Those peppers make you dream of eagles." You don't ask for clarification.
Every transaction is part performance. Offers are made, countered with a shrug or an eyebrow. Some people accept instantly. Others pause to consult the gods, or at least their grandmother. A nearby vendor, wearing a russet tunic and too much confidence, tries to sell you sugarcane juice in a gourd cup. He winks. Historians still debate the scale and structure of Aztec marketplaces like these. Some argue they were meticulously regulated, with inspectors, judges, and taxes. Others suggest that in smaller lake markets like this one, barter and community trust ruled the day. Either way, the flow is unmistakable. Goods become stories, passed hand to hand, boat to boat. You notice patterns in the chaos. Flower traders cluster toward the east, near the ceremonial rafts. Fishermen stay near the canal mouths, their boats dripping and smelly. Spices and herbs dominate the center, their fragrances mixing in a way that's oddly soothing. There's even a canoe offering haircuts, though the barber's paddle is more convincing than his shears. Mid-morning now, and the market's tempo changes. Drummers on a floating platform begin a slow, steady beat. People pause, some just for a moment, others to sway. You join Toctli in a quiet corner to share a lunch of maize cakes with squash paste, wrapped in banana leaves. He passes you a tiny wooden token, a rabbit etched into one side, a hand on the other. "From a priest," he says. "Blessing for trade." You slide it into your pouch and wonder if the priest accepts tips. You wander after lunch, weaving between canoes, admiring goods. A boy sells wind chimes made of obsidian flakes, which tinkle with an unexpectedly gentle sound. A girl your age invites you to try a perfumed face mask made of ground marigold and lime. You decline politely, but pocket the recipe. Later, you rejoin Toctli, who's just traded a basket of red chilies for a goat skull and 3 turtle shell spoons. You give him a look. "Wedding gift," he explains. The market begins to wind down in the heat of the afternoon. Boats drift apart like petals on water. Some remain, chatting lazily, but the transaction's slow. You help repack the canoe, now lighter, the baskets mostly empty, save for a few leftover squash and a clay pot of basil someone forgot to claim. You push off, gliding back into the calmer canals. The sun has shifted westward, painting the lake in long shadows and coppery light. The water ripples with your motion, reflecting the blur of chinampa gardens you've come to know so well. The marketplace fades behind you, not gone, just folded into the lake's rhythm. A brief moment of clamor, and now, once more, stillness. You arrive home to the chinampa, just as the sun begins its slow descent. Low enough to throw gold across the reeds, but high enough to show that some of the neighbors are arguing again. Toctli steers the canoe into its usual spot and quietly ties it off. But he pauses, looking across the water to where 2 men are chest deep in a shouting match. Not about love, not about theology, but about willow stakes. You can hear fragments. "That's not your boundary line," one says. "It's always been here," says the other, pointing with an accusatory chili stem. Toctli sighs and hands you a bundle of beans to sort. "Property drama," he mutters, again. Apparently, even in a floating paradise built on mud and mutual cooperation, land disputes never go out of style. You sit on the edge of the chinampa and watch it unfold like a particularly soggy soap opera. One of the men drags a string line from his canoe, trying to prove the edge of his plot. The other pulls out a totally different string, equally confident. The problem? Willow trees grow. Roots spread. Stakes rot and shift. What started as a clear border 50 seasons ago now looks more like a muddy suggestion. Soon a third party, a priest, or perhaps just someone who looks like they own a lot of birds, shows up to mediate. He carries a scroll, makes a few cryptic gestures with a maize husk, and everyone calms down a little. For now. Toxley leans over. We call him Señor Maíz. No one knows if he's actually in charge, but he says things in a very calm voice. Welcome to Chinampa politics. Historians still argue whether property rights in Chinampa societies were managed through formal land titles, oral tradition, or something far more fluid. Some evidence points to family stewardship, passed down across generations. Others cite tribute records and crop taxes imposed by Tenochtitlan's officials, especially for high-yield plots. But here on the water, borders shift with the mud, and negotiations happen over tamales more often than tribunals. Later that evening, another neighbor paddles over, not to argue, but to gossip. She's carrying dried flowers and fermented cactus fruit, so clearly this is a diplomatic visit. She sits beside Toxley and talks in low tones, occasionally gesturing toward the willow drama across the way. You catch phrases like, borrowed compost, and that duck is definitely spying. You nod sagely. Spying ducks are a known issue. As the sky deepens into dusk, children run between plots, chasing. He offers you a seat and explains quite seriously that willow roots cause 17% of all arguments on the lake. You don't question his math. In the distance, the earlier dispute seems to have ended, not with resolution, but with mutual exhaustion. One of the men throws a squash into the canal with theatrical despair. The duck retrieves it. Of course. You help Toxley prepare dinner, chilies stuffed with herbs and lake greens, cooked over a fire of dry maize husks. As you eat, he tells stories about past disputes, including the legendary tortilla wall incident, when two families tried to draw a boundary using cornmeal and ended up attracting ants from 4 districts over. The food is good, the laughter better, and the lesson? Even here, in this lake of floating plenty, humans remain gloriously human, protective of borders, proud of vegetables, prone to duck-related schemes. You look up. The stars begin to emerge one by one, their reflections flickering in the calm black mirror of the water. This world floats, yes, but it also argues, negotiates, gossips, reconciles, and it somehow stays afloat through it all. You wake to the sound of marching? No, not quite. It's the unmistakable squelch of organized sandals, the slap of damp feet against soft Chinampa mud. You peer over the edge of your sleeping mat and spot something you definitely weren't expecting. A small squad of warriors moving along the canal path. Armor glinting faintly beneath layers of painted cotton and decorative feathers. Toxley is already up, watching them with the resigned expression of a man who's seen this kind of thing before. Food patrol, he says, tightening a reed belt around his tunic. The army's hungry. Apparently, even in this floating garden dreamscape, war needs vegetables. The soldiers don't look aggressive, more like hangry delivery managers. One of them is loudly trying to explain the difference between emergency rations and personal snacks, while another carries what seems to be a list etched into a slab of bark paper. They've come to collect tribute, not in gold or weapons, but in squash, beans, and amaranth. Toxley nods grimly. We've had good harvests. That means more visits. You help him load 2 baskets with assorted vegetables, carefully sorted, unbruised, and arranged like a farmer's apology bouquet. When the soldiers arrive, the leader gives a practiced half bow and accepts the tribute without fuss. But he lingers. We heard, he says, almost casually, that there's been some unauthorized compost sharing along the West Chinampas. Toshli raises an eyebrow. You stay very still. Weeds are growing too fast, the soldier continues. Sometimes that means secrets. Ah, the subtle accusation of fertilizer-based sabotage. Apparently, when crops thrive too much in one area, others start to suspect someone's hoarding the good muck. Or worse, getting help from shady priests with private stash pits of premium lake sludge. Tochli shrugs, neither confirming nor denying. One of the younger soldiers steps forward and discreetly pulls something from his pouch. A small jade carving, no bigger than your thumb. We'll leave this here, he says, tucking it beneath a cornstalk. In case anyone wants to tell us things later? He winks. Bribes, in the form of trinkets. You've entered the underworld of Chinampa intelligence. Historians still wonder how deeply embedded the military was in everyday agriculture. Some believe Aztec warriors were regularly stationed across the empire to ensure tribute quotas were met and civil unrest stayed, well, civil. Others argue they only intervened during times of food crisis, like droughts or blight. But here, on these plots of damp perfection, they appear not as conquerors, but as hungry bureaucrats in feathered helmets. As the soldiers leave, Tochli shakes his head and mutters, "Wait until they see my tomato row." You walk with him to the back plots, the ones he tends more privately. And sure enough, his tomatoes are absurd. Tall, glossy-leaved, heavy with fruit so red they glow like coals. He chuckles. "Special frogs," he whispers. "They sing to the roots." You're not sure if he's joking. A few neighbors drift over to admire the plants. One offers a quiet exchange. 2 gourds of fermented maguey for a handful of the earliest ripe tomatoes. Toxley accepts, and the unspoken rule is clear. What the army doesn't know won't turn into tribute. The afternoon passes in a mix of field repairs and watchful weeding. You help reinforce a reed wall while a boy across the canal sings to his corn. Literally sings. Soft, repetitive tones. You ask if that helps. "Only when the frogs join in," he replies, dead serious. By evening, word spreads that another patrol is coming. Not warriors this time, but nobles inspectors, wearing fine teal tunics and soft sandals that never touch mud. They're inspecting yields, possibly scouting new plots for temple requisitions. Toxley groans. They'll want squash with symmetrical stripes. Last time they rejected a pumpkin for looking judgmental. You prepare the good rows, straight plants, well trimmed, ideally posed. You even dust off a few leaves. Presentation matters. You are essentially curating an art exhibit for picky gods. The inspectors arrive, 2 men and 1 woman, all carrying obsidian-tipped walking sticks and expressions that suggest they've never had to fertilize anything in their lives. They murmur among themselves, point, make notes on bark paper, and finally nod. "These will do," one says, without looking at Toxley. They leave behind a token, an official sun seal, signifying this Chinampa's inclusion in next month's harvest festival. Toxley doesn't smile. "Means more work," he mutters, "but good for trade." You sit together after dark, the seal gleaming faintly in the moonlight beside a particularly smug-looking squash. The Chinampas are quiet again, but beneath the surface you sense it. Alliances and exchanges, favors traded like seeds, threats deflected with tomatoes, secrets whispered in frog song. This isn't just a farm, it's a living network, an empire made of mud and memory, held together not just by roots, but by stories. And tomorrow, more vegetables, more visitors, and probably another argument about ducks. You're pulling up amaranth stalks when you hear something unfamiliar, a metallic clink, a sound that doesn't belong in this world of soft mud and hollow reed music. You pause, hand still wrapped around a stem, and glance toward the main canal. They've arrived. The strangers from across the sea. Their canoes. No, not canoes. Long, angular boats made of dark, unfamiliar wood slice through the lake like sharks that have learned to row. On board, men in strange armor glint in the sun, their breastplates cold and polished, their expressions unreadable beneath wide-brimmed hats. One of them is holding a crossbow. Another stares slack-jawed at the chinampas, as if he's just seen Atlantis and isn't sure he's awake. You squint from the edge of the garden. Tauchly stands beside you, arms crossed. His mouth is a line. Not surprised, just tight. "They don't understand," he says. The strangers paddle clumsily, nearly tipping a vendor's flower canoe. She shrieks, not in fear, but outrage. "You crushed the dahlias, you fool." One of the armored men attempts an apology, but it comes out like a command. They reach the central canal bend and stop, looking, taking notes, pointing. One man disembarks, boots squelching in the soft chinampa soil. He bends down and pokes the ground with a sword tip, then mutters something to his companion, who promptly starts sketching. You catch only a few words. Floating farms, unreal, must be illusion. They think it's a trick. Tauchly walks away before he starts laughing. Historians know now that when the Spanish first arrived in the Valley of Mexico, they were stunned by what they saw. A vast lake city, market networks, and especially the chinampa system, which they had no frame of reference for. Some early accounts described the floating farms as gardens adrift on water, while others suggest they suspected sorcery. From their perspective, that's fair. No wheels, no plows, no horses. And yet, food everywhere, abundant, ordered, thriving from mud and willpower. Impossible, but there it was. You trail the group from a distance, watching as they disembark at multiple chinampas, often without permission. They test the soil with boots, kick at fence posts, sniff squash like suspicious tourists. One tries to pluck a chili and immediately regrets it, sputtering and waving his hand as though it might spontaneously combust. Serves him right. A nearby vendor offers a clay cup of water. He declines. Wrong move. Tauchly. There's a translator, a young boy from a merchant family, who knows just enough Nahuatl and Spanish to help things stumble along. He explains that the strangers are not here to buy, not yet. They are here to observe. Maybe map, maybe measure, maybe more. At one point, the lead Spaniard, his name sounds like Diego, points toward a series of particularly lush chinampas. He turns to the translator and says something long and serious. The boy's face shifts. He says this land would be valuable to the king. Tauchly doesn't react. But later, back at the garden, he places a flat stone upright near the edge of the chinampa. Marker, he explains, for later, when they forget whose this was. You help him plant 2 more. Quietly, no ceremony, just memory set in stone. That night, the chinampas are hushed in a way you've never felt before. The frogs are silent. Even the wind moves more carefully. You lie awake, staring at the stars, listening for oars that no longer belong to this place. And you wonder, not when they will come back, but what they will take When they do, the rains come late. You stand beneath the eaves of a half-collapsing reed shelter, watching the sky refuse to weep. The clouds are swollen, heavy but dry, and the canals, they're shrinking. You step into the shallows where once the water reached your knees. Now it barely kisses your ankles. The floating farms still float, but only just. Their underbellies, once hidden beneath water's embrace, scrape against air. Tochley walks the rows with a bucket, scooping lake mud by hand to keep the roots moist. His shoulders droop in ways you've never seen before. "Everything's heavier," he says, when the lake goes quiet. It's not just the rain. Something larger is changing. A city's thirst grows. Stone replaces soil. Roads rise, buildings reach higher, and the lake, it's being tamed. Channels are filled in, tributaries diverted. The city is swallowing the water that once fed this floating kingdom. You follow Tochley through plots now dotted with cracks, the once spongy soil turning flaky and pale. He points to the canal walls, reed mats collapsing inward, fish gone. The frogs, too, seem fewer. "Even the mud is tired," he murmurs. Historians mark this moment as the beginning of the decline of the chinampas, not from warfare or blight, but from drainage. As colonial cities expanded, lakes were seen as obstacles, not ecosystems. Canals were drained, rivers rerouted, gardens became streets. Water that had once whispered between every row was paved over. You walk the border of your favorite plot, the one with the tomato plants that had always looked just a little smug. They're wilted now. Not dying, not yet, but bending as though they know their time has been borrowed too long. Tochley sets down a bundle of reeds and sighs. "We can fix many things," he says, "but not when the water forgets how to return." You help him install makeshift barriers, low fences of mud and stone to hold in what little moisture remains. It's a losing battle, but you fight it anyway. If only for ritual, for memory, for the small hope that the water is listening. By midday, a low grumble of thunder teases the sky. Everyone looks up. A child shouts, "Tlaloc!" and begins dancing a little circle of hope. A woman near the flower plot offers a splash of the last stored water to the altar, but the clouds roll on, unbothered. In the distance, you see a team of laborers digging not for planting, but for construction. They're laying down foundations for a new road, one that will slice through the old market canal. You remember where the duck used to steal squash there.
Tochley calls you back to help pull up what crops can be saved. You gather the final heads of lettuce, a few stubborn chili plants, and a basket of amaranth that somehow still thrives despite it all. "You see," he says, "some things refuse to fade." You paddle out one last time along the main canal. Its path is narrower now, barely wide enough for your boat. Houses crowd the banks. Trash floats in lazy spirals. Yet, beneath it all, you swear you can still see the geometry of gardens, the old lines, the patient patterns. Faint, but there. Historians lament what was lost here, not just food or land, but a philosophy, a way of shaping the world, where balance, rhythm, and water were the architects. In the place of floating farms, there are now foundations, fences, and forms. But the lake? It remembers, and so do you. As you drift back toward shore, the wind picks up, warm, earthy, and carrying the faintest scent of lilies. Maybe it's just imagination.
Or maybe the chinampas, even drained and dry, are still exhaling. You close your eyes and listen. The water is not gone, just waiting. You return years later, not as a farmer, not as a tribute bearer or wandering apprentice, just as a visitor, a witness. The lake is mostly gone now. Where there were once ribbons of silver threading through green gardens, there are roads, power lines, and the hum of a city trying to forget the earth it was built on. But if you know where to look, the seeds still float. You stand at the edge of what's left of Xochimilco, one of the final fragments of the Chinampa world. It's early morning. A thin mist clings to the narrow canals, and you could almost imagine the centuries rolling back, layer by layer, until all you see is flower plots and floating shrines. You rent a canoe. It's not woven reed, but painted wood. It creaks. The oar feels too clean, but the water still answers. Each stroke pulls you past islands of green, survivor plots, tended by people who remember. You spot a gardener, bent over a bed of squash blossoms, face weathered like bark, hands firm and kind. He's wearing jeans, but the way he moves, slow, rhythmic, careful, is ancient. You call out. He looks up, nods once, and returns to his planting. There are others, dozens of chinamperos keeping the system alive, some for food, some for tradition, some simply because it's the right way to grow. You glide past plots still framed by willow, soil held in place with reed mats, water glistening between rows of maize and marigolds. A solar panel glints on one raft. A smartphone rings in someone's pocket. But none of it feels out of place. The old and new breathe in the same rhythm. You reach a floating garden, ringed with flowers. Young students are here, guided by a woman in a saffron tunic. She holds up a muddy handful of roots and says, "This is how you plant on water. This is how you grow where the earth refuses to be still." Historians still debate the future of chinampas. Some believe they will vanish entirely beneath the weight of development. Others see them as models for resilient urban farming, adaptable even to the pressures of climate and sprawl. Here today, you don't need the debate. You can feel the answer beneath your canoe. The mud is rich. The water is soft. The system lives. A boy offers you a handful of herbs from his basket. "Smell this," he says. "Grew it from a seed my great-grandfather kept in a clay jar." You do. It smells like earth. The boats are still. The frogs sing slower now. And across the floating gardens, the hush of night settles like a soft blanket over the water. You lie back in the canoe, drifting gently along the last canal, your hands trailing in the cool current. The stars blink to life above you, slowly, patiently, mirrored in the ripples below. Each one a quiet promise, each one a quiet memory. The scent of marigolds lingers on your fingertips. You can still feel the soft pull of roots beneath the soil. And somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoes across the fields, small and round, and fading into the stillness. Beneath you, the water holds stories of gardens that floated, of families that remembered, of seeds planted in mud but born to rise. The lake is quiet now, but it is not silent. It speaks in reeds and wind and starlight, in the hush between paddles, in the softness of soil cupped in a gardener's hand. You close your eyes. You let go of the paddle. You float. And as you drift, you carry with you a little piece of a garden that never stopped trying. Good night, dreamer of lakes and seeds and songs. Sleep deep. Sleep still. Sleep floating.